let's start with the beginning. Like where are you from, and take us to sort of what you and David, your brother, decided to do after college to start this business. But where'd you grow up? Where'd you go to school?
We grew up in D.C. We were taught as kids by our dad how to invest as a game. So we weren't very anxious about stock market movements one way or the other. It was mostly companies that are fun to buy from, and therefore we might buy some shares and learn about it. And we really had no anticipation of starting a business.
How old were you when your dad got you involved in it?
Certainly we were learning there at age 7, 8, 9. But I think my first investment was when I was 11 in Vie de France croissants in the red, white, and blue box. I bought that stock at 4 7/8 before decimalization. And 2 years later, I sold it for 3 5/8. So that was my first investment, which was a little painful for an 11-year-old to see that happen. But the joy of, we would go on our spring vacation, and thought we were going to go out swimming that day or play tennis maybe. And at least one of the days of the vacation, Dad would say, okay, kids, let's go get in the back of the car, the rental car, and we're going to drive out now, and we're going to spend the morning with the chief financial officer of a semiconductor wafer design company that I'm invested in. And so there was some pain in losing a sunny day, but what we learned is that companies are run by people, and we would get in the car after those conversations, and Dad wanted to hear what we thought, and we'd be laughing and saying, I don't trust that guy. Do you trust that guy, Dad? I don't know why you bought those shares. So the game of business was a game. It wasn't corporations were distant from us and taking advantage of everyone in society. They were run by people that made mistakes, that made brilliant decisions, that were innovative, that fell behind, and that changed the world.
It's now I get why you got into the finance business. I was thinking, okay, you went to Brown, you're a creative writing major or an English lit major, and why didn't you study economics or math or some science if you were sort of passionate about this at such a young age?
It's a great question. Brown University wasn't necessarily pro-business when I was there.
It still isn't.
That's true, although there is an entrepreneurship department, and I do love so much about what I learned at Brown. But, we also bring a qualitative view to investing. So I would say probably 35% of my investment decision relies on mathematics, and 65% relies on a review of the product, the competitive advantages of the business, but really even more on the leadership team, who owns that business, who invested in that company along the way. What's the decision-making structure of leadership at that organization?
So, piggybacking on that, Ed Harrell, who's a local investor here and a professor, had a question for you. I circulated an email to a lot of people. We got a lot of questions, so I'll throw out Ed's question, which is, how important was the liberal arts background in preparing you for your career? Because we have students in the house too, by the way, and thank you guys for coming.
Props.
But some students, they think I'm going to be an accounting major or I want to do hard stuff. I always advise people, because I'm biased like you. I went to a liberal arts school. I'm like, learn how to read and write and think and communicate. That's more important. But, in terms of what you studied at Brown, which is kind of really different from people in your profession, how important was that?
Well, I think liberal arts education gives you a sample plate of a lot of different subjects, and teaches you how to think and how to learn. I think probably my time at Brown, more than anything else, taught me two things. The importance of culture, of bringing together diverse viewpoints. Brown University did a wonderful thing, although it was complex and difficult, but there, sort of at orientation, you were brought into a room like this, and very controversial subjects were brought into the mix. And you had an open debate, and you heard a variety of perspectives, and all of a sudden you realized, wherever I came from is not where everyone else came from. And if you grew up in D.C. and spent a lot of time in D.C., and maybe you were in certain circles, you got a much broader perspective, and that's so important for any organization, any team, to have a great diverse mix of perspectives, backgrounds, ethnicity, gender, etc. And so I learned that at Brown, and I really learned at Brown entrepreneurship. We started the cable television channel at Brown when I was there. And I think at its peak when I graduated, we had like
Cable television.
110 daily
Wasn't
viewers.
Ted Turner a Brown grad?
Yes, he was. Well,
So
I don't
was
know
there
if he
any connection
graduated.
with that,
I don't know
or-
if he graduated, but he was at Brown.
He got kicked out.
I think he did. But yeah, I think Brown and college and liberal arts is actually a great stomping ground for entrepreneurial thinking, whereas finance, economics brings the discipline of understanding cash flow and making smart strategic decisions, but maybe not as free and open thinking and innovative thinking as you can get from a liberal arts student.
That's awesome stuff, and I hope the students in the room are paying attention to what Tom just said. So you got out of Brown. What prompted you and David to create this business?
We were not employable.
Okay.
So it starts
Wait,
there.
what's that mean, that you weren't employable? Because of
Well,
your major?
I
or-
was in graduate school in linguistics in the Rocky Mountains at the University of Montana, which is a wonderful place in Missoula. And my brother was working for Louis Rukeyser. And he was becoming frustrated because he didn't feel that he could really freely express his views there, although he loved Mr. Rukeyser and what Rukeyser brought to investors, which is a real commitment to being a long-term bull and an optimist about entrepreneurship and innovation, creating value. So that was great, but against that, Dave would advocate for discount brokers, let's say, in their newsletter, and there would always be the corresponding page that were all the reasons you would not use a discount broker. And so Dave became a little frustrated by that, and we decided, let's put together our own newsletter and mail it out to our friends and family, and maybe we can turn this into a business. And we sent it out to 1,200 people. We gathered our grade school, high school mailing lists. Somehow our schools were willing to give it to us. Summer camps, friends, family, all the rest, 1,200. And we thought, we're probably going to get maybe 500 or 600 subscribers at $48 a year. And that'll be like 20K, 20 to 30K. And then we'll get started and we'll actually build a business. I think we got 8 subscribers out of our 1,200 mailing, which actually maybe is not that bad, direct mailing response. In print mail in the early 1990s, but we realized at that point we didn't have a business, but we lucked upon an April Fool's joke where we created a fictitious penny stock on a stock exchange that did not exist. The Halifax Canadian Stock Exchange does not exist. What was happening in the early 1990s, there was a lot of really unethical and probably illegal penny stock promotion online. And so we wanted to counter that with a joke, and it spiraled out of control. We actually got death threats to our work phone line, which was David's home phone number. And because we were calling out what was happening. People were taking an 8-cent stock, telling an incredible story about it, then it would jump to 38 cents and they would sell, and it would fall back down to 8 cents or even lower. And that was happening repeatedly. So we made up a company, we hyped it over a weekend. All of a sudden we saw in the community people playing along with us. Some people were posting notes, I got my shares. I got $4,000 and it's $40,000 already 2 hours later. And so it spiraled out of control, and the Wall Street Journal wrote an article about it. And at that point, AOL had just gone public, and they contacted us and asked us if we would like to start a business.
Amazing. And how did you pick the name, by the way?
David was flipping through Bartlett's quotations book and came upon a quote from Shakespeare, As You Like It, about the Motley Fool exiled in that play. And a fool, I see a fool in the forest, a motley fool. And Dave thought, gosh, Motley Fool, that would be a great disclaimer if things didn't go well.
Oh, man. Phenomenal. So that was the real reason you did it? And aside from the fact you guys were English lit buffs, right?
That definitely played into it, and there's so much great Erasmus in Praise of Folly. There's so many great reference points for fools out there. And of course, it's great to be contrary to financial services. The larger financial advisory businesses in this country, we think, haven't necessarily been serving others as well as they've been serving themselves over the last many decades with their fee structures and the conflicts of interest that we all saw emerge in 2008, 2009, although they've been pretty apparent for the last 20 years to those of us who like to invest in stocks and build our own portfolios. But one story I will tell about AOL, because I'll try and keep it brief, but
oh, that's good.
we were
This was your first big break, too, right?
That was the first big break, and we were invited in by AOL to consider starting a business. And we called our dad and told him what was up. We were blown away. The Motley Fool was in the Wall Street Journal. That was comical on its own. We had about 100 subscribers at that point. And we met with Ted Leonsis and about 8 other people on AOL's executive team. So it was just Dave and me, and we're like, wow, what is happening here? Dad's one piece of advice to us was, do not give up any equity. You guys are young. If you love what you're doing, make sure you have control. So don't give up any ownership. Just sign a partnership deal. It's not expensive to do what you're doing. And so we met. Thought that was very good advice. We met with AOL. Ted slid. Ted had just been acquired by AOL, so he was wanting to break through with new content at AOL. And he slid the offer over to us. At this point, I think we had about, I'll just say 5,000, 3,000 in sales, maybe, as a business. And we looked at the offer, and our response was, Ted, this is incredibly generous, but we really don't want to sell any equity. And that enraged Ted. I could do a Ted impersonation right now, but I won't. And we love Ted, but Ted was very upset by that. And we left, got in our car. There were no mobile phones, so we had to drive 30 minutes home to Alexandria and call our dad. Told him what happened. He made this offer. We said, as you said, Dad. We said no. And he said, okay, so what was the offer? And we said, well, he offered to buy 19.9% of a company that we would incorporate called the Motley Fool. And because that means they don't have to consolidate that into their financial statements. That's why it's 19.9%. And he offered $600,000 to buy 19.9%. And there was a 3 or 4 second, an audible pause on the other side of the line. And Dad said, you said no? And we were like, Dad, you told us. And he said, 3,000 in sales and a $600,000 investment for 20%, valuing it at $3 million. I've never heard anything like that. You have to go back and say yes. And so we did, and that was our first investment from AOL.
Your dad was probably saying, you guys are aptly named, right?
Yes.
Missed
you
that
fools.
One. Right. So that kicked you guys off, and you guys were off to the races, right? So what was the next step in your growth? Like, how did you that would be mid-90s-ish? So
Yes.
how did you attack the market that way and differentiate yourself? Zavi Band over here is one of our hot entrepreneurs at CONNECTpreneur. We had a question for you which ties in with what you said earlier, and he said that there's a lot of charlatans out there delivering hot stock picks. How do you maintain your authenticity and brand? So with a name like that too. But I guess, how did you grow the business?
I love it, although I love it when I find an entrepreneur that has created an additional hurdle to their success, that is presenting some additional challenge to themselves. Instead of just going into it and seeing the external as a challenge, putting another bar up for yourself to get over. And that really was our name. When we decided to incorporate and really go for it, we were like, we know a lot of people respond to our name with hesitation, but we want to teach the world why to think unconventionally about finance. So in a way, at the start it was probably a hindrance, but then it rapidly became the most valuable asset at our company and remains that today. You can just imagine that if you're going to look at news on one of your stocks, and alongside that in the late 1990s you see Reuters, Bloomberg, both excellent organizations, and the Motley Fool providing you news on your stock, you kind of have to click that third one to figure out what the hell's going on. And so we got a lot of first looks because of our name. And I think probably from an investment standpoint, the single thing that we believe in most and that we stand for most is long-term. That is probably that's the most distinguishing factor of the Motley Fool. Our data shows going back to 1994 when we were founded, or summer of 93 when we made our first stock picks, that had we never sold a share of all the stocks that we had recommended, we would have better results. And that's hard for us to process, but I bet that for the vast majority of people in this room, if you went back and looked at your investment decisions, the same thing would be true for you. Because the worst thing that any of us can do is sell a winner too soon. If you buy Amazon and sell it after a 50% gain in 1999, you feel pretty good in 2001 when it's down 90%, but then when it rises another 200 times in value, there's no way you'll ever make that lost gain up for having sold too soon. So mathematically, we're really rewarded for thinking long term, and I think of that in the private markets and in the public markets. The best decisions we can make are the ones that we plan to hold on to for 10 to 20 years.
So did you grow using a lot of PR and marketing and playing off of your brand? Would you say that was a major reason why you grew, or were you actually picking awesome, making great picks and people were seeing the results?
I think it was a mix of things. I mean, certainly being on AOL's platform and they were growing their membership extremely rapidly helped us. I think we've done well as investors all the way through. So we've always said There aren't many actively managed investors out there that really make it clear, if we don't do better than average, you should just index. Just call Vanguard and essentially at this point get free money management from Vanguard. Certainly among the most honorable companies in finance in the history of our species. So you can just make a phone call, it takes 5 minutes and you're done. You'll beat 90% of what's out there. So if we can't outperform that, we don't deserve your attention and your investment. So I think performance is a very big part of it. And then I think the third thing is we're always trying to make the subject accessible. We're always trying to make what seems obscure, complex. We're trying to remove the Greek alphanumerics and put business, entrepreneurship, innovation, and investing in the common.
Yeah, I mean, I love that about you guys. You're into educating your members, and I've been to your offices. I've seen sort of the things that David was showing us, and very, very cool stuff what your team is doing. How big are you guys now? How many subscribers do you have? You know, what kind of revenue?
We have more than 500,000 paying subscribers. We're a company of about 300 employees. We did something very unusual, which is that in the late 1990s, we raised about $55 million of venture investment. And in 2007, we began a highly unusual process of buying back all of our venture capital investors and choosing to remain private. And that was beautiful and painful. There's got to be a German word for that. So beautiful and painful. It was beautiful because we have a tremendous amount of flexibility now as a company. As a private, wholly owned company of our size, generating sufficient cash to expand, we're in a great position. However, in order to buy out those investors between 2007 and 2012, we had to pay about $120 million to buy them out. So that was, I mean, we have sat and watched organizations run past us with huge financing rounds and to be able to innovate in ways that we've dreamed about. And so there's pain in that, but we made that decision going back to our dad's initial advice. If you can maintain control of your vision, and it was difficult. We had one venture capital investor that sued us to attempt to force us to go public. So that was an unusual situation, which we thankfully resolved. But the net result of that is now we're on the other side of it. And so at age 49, 24 years into the Motley Fool, I'm more excited than I ever have been because we now have the resources and the ideas and the network to deliver much bigger changes in the world of finance and business than we have.
Right. When you went private, so you had AOL as a shareholder and a VC as a shareholder?
I think we had three different VC investors.
Why did you raise the money in the first place?
Well,
were you thinking about going public? Or?
No, yeah, we were certainly expecting to go public. There's a chapter in there that I skipped over because it can be too painful at this hour for me to revisit it. But that chapter is 2001. And as we all know, a brutal period for companies like ours. At that point, I guess one of the big learnings for us all the way through. So step one as a business with the AOL contract and their investment is we grew a huge audience. And we were basically getting a percentage of the revenues that AOL was generating on their hourly fees. Right? We used to pay $4 an hour to be on AOL, if you remember that, and we would get 40 cents of that. And we built up a really great profitable business at that point. Unfortunately, we learned in negotiation, and AOL was a powerhouse negotiator. And I say that with praise and as a critique of an organization that I really love, AOL, and that I loved. But I don't think ultimately that's what drives value. And so we went through a lot of negotiation with them. And what we ultimately learned, again in conversation with our parents, was, hey, you think you have 100,000 customers, but you really only have one because AOL is the only one paying your check. So we realized, okay, we need to grow our business beyond AOL. And then we built our business up with the financing and had, let's say, 10 advertisers that were generating 90% of our revenues. And we didn't see anything wrong with that because we'd raised so much money. We thought, this will all be fine. Those 10 advertisers, let's say that maybe 8 or 9 of them were discount brokers. And so when 2001 happened, sequentially over about a 3-month period, each one of our discount broker advertisers called and said, we're cutting our spend either 80, 90, or 100%. So we watched our entire business fold over about a 6-month period in 2001 and realized, again, we have too few customers. We had one with AOL. We had way too concentrated a business in advertising, and that's why subscription really saved us and really aligned us with the interests of the people that we're working for.
Right. So did you raise the money before 2001?
We raised the money before 2001, and we had a difficult time raising any money after that. Having raised $55 million, I'll say in 2001, at a certain point in time, we had $1 million in cash, and we have never been a company that was like throwing crazy parties or being reckless. And we had $1 million in cash and $5 million in debt at a 20% interest rate. So we basically had 1 year of interest on the loan, sitting there with our team of about 80 fools at that point, and said, let's figure this out. And necessity, focuses the mind, and that made us a better company.
If you had to say, look back and pick one or two items, one or two things that happened that allowed you to survive all that, what would you say it was?
The people that were in the room, some of whom are here today, like Olin Douglas and Lawrence Greenberg and Nate McMahon and Scott Shedler. Some people who put in tremendous hours and cared deeply. We had layoffs, and it was a beautiful, painful experience. You might not think it would be beautiful, but to our credit, we've always been, I think, a very transparent company. So we can always be better at that, but we always put our financials up all the way through for everyone working. We're investors, and so you saw our company fall apart over a 6-month period. If you were sitting there, you kind of weren't surprised, unfortunately, by what happened. And so when we had the layoffs, we had a few layoffs, and each time everyone got in a line to say thank you and go make it work. And so when you're there with Lawrence and Olin and everyone, seeing that and feeling that, you've got something that matters to people. It's worth it. Let's sit down and figure this out. And here we are 18 years later.
What's your secret to recruiting people like that?
That one comes from my brother, David, who said, hey, here's our game plan. Let's hire people smarter than we are. And it's ended up being pretty easy to do so.
That's really cool. And speaking of Dave, you guys went to St. Albans. My son went to St. Albans. And I've met him, and he's a terrific guy. How do you like working with your brother? And how do you guys divide up your responsibilities? And most importantly, who's the better picker?
That's good. Those are all relatively easy answers to give. David is the better investor. His returns are completely unbelievable. We have a lot of market-beating investors in our company. I think if you're not following my brother, I highly recommend it, particularly since I read through and know some of your backgrounds and who's in the room here today. David basically treats the public markets like a venture capitalist would. So he is looking for the highest growing emerging businesses that have founders that are actively involved in that business and that are truly innovative and disruptive. And his success rate is, out of every 10 investments, he has among the lower accuracy rates at our company. So if you were to ask me, hey, who hits more singles? Sorry for the sports analogy, but who hits more singles? It would not be my brother. Out of every 10 investments, he's right 4 to 5 times. And of the 5 times he's wrong, some of those stocks are down 50%, 70%. And that's painful. Some people just don't want to be involved in that style of investing. But when you buy Amazon, as he did at $3.21 a share and never sell, and now it's $950, and then you buy Priceline, you buy Mercado Libre, and you buy Intuitive Surgical, and you buy Facebook and Google. And when you're out there looking for the great growth companies, you're going to get a few things. You're going to get a lower success rate in terms of the frequency of being right. You're going to get a few companies that drive like 90% of the returns of your portfolio, and you're going to beat the market in an open market like the U.S. So that's the investment side of it. There is data to show that businesses that have 2 founders have higher success rates than businesses with 1 founder. So going at this as brothers has been hugely beneficial for us. We're not the same. We run an internal quiz that I recommend to everyone here. It's called the Synergist Quiz. You can Google it. It's free. It's about a 30-question quiz. It's a little bit repetitive, but ultimately what you learn about yourself or anyone else is these 4 traits ranked. In fact, let's just for the fun of it, self-assess here together as a group. So the 4 traits are, I'm an idea person. I always have new thoughts about what we could be doing, but I also have the attention span of a squirrel. That's the idea person. Number 2, I'm an operator. I wake up in the morning, I make my checklist. The number of items that I check off that list correlates with how happy I am at the end of the day. I may not prioritize that list very well. Maybe I need the visionary to tell me what looks more or less important, but I can get things done. That's number 2. Number 3, I think in systems. I see inefficiencies, I plan, I help us take one step back so we can go 3 steps forward. I'm a systems thinker. The downside of being a systems thinker, I probably complain more than the average person because I see a lot of inefficiency around me, particularly when I travel, if you're a systems person. And number 4, a people person. I am the social glue in situations. I'm intuitive, I sense what other people need, I'm pretty good at inspiring people, and I love the opportunity to work in teams and collaborate. So there are the 4. And what I'd just like to do is have everyone raise their hand based on what you think is number 1 for you. So I'll just say them again. Visionary, operator, systems person, people person. Okay? How many people are visionary here first? Yep. How many people are operators? Great, we look like we got a pretty good company in the room. Pretty good balance. How about systems thinkers to make sure we can scale? Great. And how about people? Awesome. Truly a very balanced room, and that's what we like to find in teams. And David and I are both idea people. We're both visionary in our orientation, which can be over-celebrated. Each of the 4 is critical to having successful project, company, teamwork. David is more of a visionary systems thinker, and I'm more of a visionary people person. For example, I'm still talking, even though TIEN asked me a question like 3 minutes ago, because I'm a people person. I work on my listening skills when I'm talking. And David is really systems thinking. He's trying to look at a whole, he's created a game called CAPS, where we have our community rating stocks, and he's built a system to drive alpha out of our community, and that's much more the way David thinks. And that creates complementary work that we do together, and also creates misalignment. Sorry. It also can create conflict for us. So the last little suggestion I'll give in my 18-minute answer to this question, I apologize, is we learned working with outside family business thinkers about a mediation or negotiation tool that has worked really beautifully. And it is at the top, think of scale 1 to 10 on the grid. At the top is assert. I am fully assertive. At the bottom, I'm avoiding. At the right side, I'm accommodating. So over here, whatever you say we're gonna do. Up here, whatever I say we're gonna do. And down here, neither of us is gonna talk about it. And David and I learned that we were putting a lot of things in a void because we love each other as brothers. And so we don't want that conflict at work. And we learned to move up the ladder, be more assertive and accommodating at the same time so that we could compromise and then collaborate on our differences. So I would say, again, 24 years in, we're happier than we've ever been working together, but it takes work.
This is awesome. Congratulations, and thank you for that lesson. I'm going to have to watch the video again, kind of process some of that. I think it's brilliant stuff. We have a bunch of investment questions. So Alan Schleifer with the Wharton Club of DC, the president, had a question about the 3 A's. We got a lot of tech people in here. The 3 A's being Alphabet, Amazon, and Apple. What are your thoughts now, and what are your thoughts about those companies in 5 years? And who's the next Amazon, Apple, or Alphabet?
Great question. Historically, if you look back to the 1950s, the largest companies in the world, or the largest companies by industry, were underperformers against the market or their industry. So if you take the largest retailer, or the largest energy company, or the largest tech company, they will underperform the industry average over the next rolling 5 to 10 years. That's hard for us to process because in order for them to have gotten to that place, we have seen them win. We have loved them as investments. But just as Microsoft, Intel, Cisco, AOL, and Yahoo were considered certain winners in the late 1990s, that is developing now, and it's being accentuated by all the passive indexing. In the last 4 years, Vanguard has raised more money in assets under management, has raised more new money over the last 4 years than all of the 4,000 investment firms in the world, the 4,000 largest investment firms. Vanguard has raised more than them in the last 4 years, times 8. And that is going into capitalization-weighted indexing. So that money is pouring into the largest companies. So I'm not going to be here saying Alphabet, Amazon, and Apple are doomed, but I think when you combine the fact that they're already so large with the regulatory issues that naturally arise when you're of that size, with the expectation that many of those investors have that these will be 20% annualized compounders as they have been, I would expect them to underperform over the next 5 to 10 years, particularly the small cap index. So historically, small caps have beaten large caps by about 4 percentage points per year. The reverse has been true in the last 10 years. So I think that's going to flip, and I'm much more interested in small companies. And I'll give one example of, I think there are a couple that I think a company called Shopify is a huge disruptor. It's been a great stock. It's always hard to buy a stock when it's already up 4 or 5 times in value. But it'll be volatile, but Shopify is essentially a platform that allows people to start stores and be entrepreneurs online. And I think that's a much better view for retail over the next 10 years than Macy's or going to malls, 1 in 4 of which will shut in the next 5 years. So I think Shopify is a really emerging, exciting company.
Any other small promising companies? And Jim and Jordan, who's a private investor, has this question. What are some of your small promising tech company ideas, and how do you guys, generally speaking, go about analyzing, figuring out who's like Shopify? What kind of decision process you guys go through?
We all kind of have a different process. I'll just share mine. There are a lot of commonalities, though. So I think we generally favor founder-run public companies. There are about 550 of them in the US. It's about 11% of the total market. And that group of public companies beats the market by 2 percentage points a year historically. So that's pretty dramatic right there. The reason I think that's true is you have somebody who's managing that organization if it's the only asset in their life. It's a Warren Buffett principle. So that's a positive first step. The second is, do I think that they will be in enough demand that they can raise prices over time? And that was Warren Buffett's observation. The most important factor that he found in companies that he had invested in over the last 60 years is the biggest winners had pricing power. So where you see demand moving or a shift away from that, loss of relevance, and you see the move towards something becoming more relevant, more demand, and more pricing power, that's a really good sign. I'll share 3 companies that I like. One that was down 15% yesterday, so a little discount on this one. Or, I'll give you my stats after to remind you that I'm wrong about 40% of the time. So factor that into these 3. One of them is a local company called Appian. How many people have heard of Appian? Ah, that's great. How many of you are shareholders?
Tom Schroll's in here. He's with Novak Biddle. You guys did very well with that, Tom.
Congratulations, and I'm a big fan of Novak Biddle. How many of you are shareholders of Appian? Okay, that's interesting. I just think that for so many in the room to know, of course, it's a local company. Matt Calkins, obviously a brilliant person. I think he came in 3rd place in the World Board Game Championships. That's pretty telling. Business is a game. He owns about 50% of the company. He's obviously in it for the rest of his life with that stake and with what he's been creating over the last 15 plus years. So I really like Appian. A second company that I like is a company called Varonis, which is on the NASDAQ, VRNS. Appian is APPN. And Varonis is cybersecurity for the inside of organizations. So it's basically at a meta level looking at the aggregate data of employees or contractors or service providers. And it's really the only company in that category. It also has a founder that's running that business. And then the third one, which is down 15% in the last 24 hours, is iRobot, which will have a fair amount of competition, but I think the Roomba, the Brava, and home automation are a huge trend, and I expect iRobot to have an incredible holiday season this year. I think every time Elon Musk speaks, probably iRobot's sales go up. As worried buyers acquire something to make their life easier that they realize will ultimately make that device will make us its pet at some point along the way.
That's great. Chris Ross has a question. He's with BNY Mellon. What are your near-term expectations of the dollar, and what will be its biggest impact?
I'm not the fool to answer that one successfully. I don't like to project currency or oil prices, or for the most part, we're not macro thinkers as investors. So I'm certainly interested in blockchain technology. I probably wouldn't buy Bitcoin right now, but I wouldn't also mock Bitcoin. Maybe if I was Jamie Dimon, and I don't mean to take a cheap shot at some. If there's a red laser light on my forehead at any point, please shout. But I think Jamie Dimon saying that Bitcoin is a joke is like the CEO of Barnes & Noble saying that Amazon can't, all the sales of Amazon equal one store at Barnes & Noble in 1999. So I think the world's changing, and I don't say that JP Morgan won't keep up with it, but I think blockchain technology And that currency, those developments are really, really interesting and will have a major impact on financial
Do you have any
services.
recommendations on blockchain companies?
I really don't. I mean, I think most of it is private at this point. So
What are your thoughts on ICOs?
also not going to be your greatest contributor on that.
Got it. Well, thanks. But I mean, from a macro level, any other thoughts? Like in terms of it disrupting everything from financial services world to banking to transportation, healthcare, privacy, everything.
Yeah, I guess we should all be looking at, just to go at the highest level possible, we should all be looking at the companies we're invested in and the businesses we're involved in to make sure they're rapidly accumulating digital assets. And so every opportunity, you know, if we have a live event like this, what ends up happening is there's a much larger audience that's at home watching. And that audience will be putting on devices to feel like they're immersed in at the event. So I just think whether it's currency, whether it's intellectual property, and I guess I'm making an obvious statement to this room, but wherever your asset base is not digital, which is a reason that I love Appian, I think you're just going to become rapidly irrelevant as a business in the next 10 years.
What are you doing, the Motley Fool, to not be irrelevant? You've had, you know, you've recovered nicely a couple times, right? We had the Yahoo Finance thing, and which you guys can read about. But you guys have done great in terms of pivoting and recovering. What are you doing to stay ahead? Like, what are you doing? You know, Warren Buffett talks about moats. Like, what kind of moats are you building around your business to stay? You know, you're a young guy. You want to do this for another 40 years. Like, what are you doing to stay relevant and stay ahead of everybody?
Well, I think the first thing is organizing our investment IP more effectively for our members and really providing the data. As I said, I'm wrong 40% of the time, and about 10 to 12% of my investments drive 85% of my returns. So the more data I can provide you to understand how to make decisions and to figure out whether I'm the right person to be advising you, the better. We have investors that are right 80% of the time, and their aggregate returns are lower, but their portfolios are less volatile, and they have a much higher batting average. They're not Dave Kingman, sorry to go sports again, who is striking out a lot and hitting a lot of home runs. They're Rod Carew, sorry to throw another one, particularly to throw sports references like 40 years old, but hey. But out there hitting singles. So I think it's really being data-driven in what we're presenting to people. And we're a business that's fascinated by not just investing, but business as well. And so we're invested in a company of a, I don't think of anyone as a former employee. Both those words don't strike me as true of the Motley Fool. But in her site, which is here today, which is an organization that's helping women find organizations that, that care about having high performers of all types, male, female, et cetera, and has a whole system with 50,000 ratings on companies by women and men across the country. So we're very interested in helping businesses develop their cultures, and we're very interested in yoking together investing in business as a company. So I think we'll be providing B2B business solutions for organizations and entrepreneurs that want to build great long-term properties.
Great, thank you for that. And you know, it's funny because I'm thinking today versus 20 years ago. You know, data is so transparent out there in the market. And I was struck by your comment when I asked you about, you know, how you look at things. You said founder-owned public companies. So you probably do a lot. Do you do a lot of diligence on the sort of psychology and the soft part of the founder and their team? And how do you get that information?
So, thank you for asking that question. Maggie Maraca's in the front row here, and she has an unusual job at the Motley Fool. Her full-time job is just to connect us to people that we find interesting, which I think every organization should have. Well, let's say that has more than 100 employees. That person is literally just calling every day saying, hey, there's a CTO at a local company we saw interviewed, seems interesting, can we have coffee with them? Hey, this person has written a book on behavioral finance, and we'd like to have them come by our office. So that's what Maggie's doing constantly. So that causes us to reach out to John Mackey, the founder, CEO of Whole Foods, about 7 years ago, and now he's on our board simply because of that phone call, and he's had a huge impact on our company. So our network is a key priority of ours at the Fool, And that means we contact all the CEOs of the companies that we invest in or thinking of recommending. Some of them we can't get in touch with. We used to have Jeff Bezos on our radio show almost every week on NPR, and it's tough to get in touch with Jeff now, and we understand that. But I think there's an investor in Austin, Texas that I've gotten to know through our network. His name is Michael Schern, and Michael agreed with the data that says that founder-run companies beat the market by 2 percentage points. He's a money manager. He manages quite a bit of money, and he was like, that's really unbelievable if you think about that. And then he said, what I want to do is I want to go find the best of those 550. So he began inviting himself to sit down and meet Michael Dell, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, traveled around the country just meeting founder CEOs, and he was looking for a few factors that couldn't easily be screened, that weren't just numerical. You had to ask a few questions, but they were simple questions to ask, and that he could draw the information out and find the best 100 founders, the best 50 founder-run companies, because then you'd end up with Buffett or Larry Page or Larry Ellison or the Bezos. I mean, there's so much of the value is created by these companies that are run by the founder in the public market. And he drew a very interesting conclusion. It may be sad for us to hear it, but it's interesting also. And he believes it's true, and I actually believe it is too. And that is, he said, the best performing founders of public companies over the last 25 years are people who have at least one parent who doubted them. That has caused some people in our office to say, I need to start treating my kids a little bit more unfairly, don't I? But that's maybe driving them to be an Energizer bunny, like to prove that person wrong for not believing in them, which is painful, but it's also inspirational. And so I think doubt motivates a lot of founders to keep going 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Who doubted you, your mom or your dad?
My older brother. No. Maybe that's why we're not a $75 billion market cap, because we were pretty loved by, we had a lot of encouragement by our parents.
That's cool. Well, we're almost out of time. I guess we'll wrap by having you talk a little bit about, if someone wants to join the Fool and get some more information, how can we do that?
Well, my email is tomg@fool.com. So I answer all my email within 4 years. We also have subsidiary. We're doing something quite unusual at the Fool now, which is that we're creating subsidiaries and taking outside investment in those subsidiaries from investors with a super long-term perspective that are aligned with us. So we actually have a company presenting today called FoolWorks. That is the core tool that we have used to develop our culture. It is a point of pride of ours, our internal culture. How many of you have heard of conscious capitalism? Yeah, so I recommend if you're not raising your hand, you at least Google that and read about it. It simply says this: each of your stakeholders needs to be treated in a way that they want to lengthen and deepen their relationship with you. Every individual employee, every individual shareholder, every individual customer, the communities that you operate in, et cetera. And the more you look at those stakeholders and try and score whether or not you're making them happy, the more sustainably great your company can be. And so FoolWorks is a tool that has helped us manage our 320 Fools' individual careers more successfully, and that's a tool that we're bringing out. So I'll be back there with the team at that table or during their presentation. We're right in Alexandria, Virginia. We have a tour of our offices the first week of each month.
Very cool offices.
We'd love to have you come by. And but ultimately, more than anything else, we'd love you to join Stock Advisor, which costs, I think, $100 a year and gets 2 stock picks a month, and get invested, get your kids invested, and start methodically investing in every market environment, except that the market will rise and fall over time. I would be surprised if we didn't have a 10 to 15% market decline in the next 18 months, but I don't think that should dissuade us from investing right now. We should just be excited to get discounts when that market drop comes. So, Fool.com.
That's so cool. Thank you for everything. Thank you for sharing your morning with us. Would like to, let's give it up for Tom.
Thanks,
yep.
Dan.
Thanks. You're going to stick around.
Oh, thanks. You're going to stick around?
Oh, yeah, I'll be there.